awaken your spirit chosen ones. They thought the trial would end in your silence, not realizing your silence was the opening statement. For centuries, power has never truly belonged to the loud, but to those who mastered restraint while the wicked mistook it for weakness. History's real rulers weren't always crowned. Sometimes they were crucified in public, then vindicated in the court of divine timing. The irony: even empires can't file an appeal against fate. They say the Coven is fleeing, not out of guilt, but out of exposure. The city's bleeding not because it's collapsing, but because it's cleansing. Every secret oath, every falsified record, every ritual of manipulation is being dragged from the shadows and cross-examined by consequences they never prepared for. You didn't come to destroy. You came to reveal what was always rotting beneath the marble floors. Funny how kindness can look like weakness until it's subpoenaed. You gave mercy, they gave malice. You offered silence, they mistook it for surrender. Now the very calm they mocked has become evidence, and the courtroom isn't just made of walls and gavels anymore. It's cosmic, it's karmic, and it's public. So watch closely. Not everyone running is innocent, and not every scream is pain. Sometimes it's the sound of hypocrisy losing its last argument. Number one, they fed on your silence, mistaking stillness for surrender. They thought you had no words left, that your quiet meant defeat. But you weren't done. You were simply watching. You were gathering evidence in the language of patience while they mistook your calm for ignorance. What they never understood was that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's what happens when the wise decide that noise doesn't win wars. Time does. You let them talk, plot, and celebrate too early. They mistook your peace for absence because they've only ever known power through control and noise. They couldn't comprehend someone powerful enough to pause, to breathe, to wait for divine timing instead of instant reaction. That's what frightened them the most, that you didn't need to fight to win. Your restraint exposed their desperation. Every lie they told in your silence was a noose they tied with their own hands. There's a rare kind of strength in people who don't chase the chance to be heard, but choose the right moment to speak. You weren't trying to prove them wrong. You were letting them do it themselves. The more they tested you, the more they revealed who they truly were. You didn't lift a sword, you lifted truth. And truth, once seen, can't be silenced again. They called your calm a weakness because chaos is all they understand. They needed noise to feel powerful. You needed only clarity. And when that clarity finally moved, it wasn't loud. It was final. You didn't fight back. You let reality do it for you. Silence was never your surrender. It was your evidence being collected, your dignity being protected, your justice being prepared. Now they realize too late that stillness doesn't mean stopped. It means waiting. And waiting is what breaks those who mistake patience for fear. Your silence wasn't the end of your story. It was the moment they began writing their own downfall. Number two, the Coven was never powerful, just united in fear. Their strength was an illusion built on shared panic, not real purpose. They gathered not because they believed in each other, but because each of them was terrified to stand alone. Fear made them loyal, guilt made them obedient. They didn't bond through truth. They bonded through secrets, manipulation, and the constant threat of exposure. Their alliance was never sacred. It was survival disguised as power. Every spell, every plot, every whispered meeting was nothing more than a desperate attempt to keep their lies alive a little longer. The moment one of them cracked, the rest began to crumble. They never trusted each other, only what they could gain from the illusion of unity. When fear becomes the glue, all it takes is one moment of courage, one person refusing to play along, and the entire structure collapses. That's what happened when your presence entered the story. You didn't fight them. You exposed the weakness they built their world on. Their so-called power relied on the illusion that no one would dare challenge them. Once they realized someone could stand unafraid, their entire system began to shake. Their rituals lost meaning, their oaths lost value, and their titles lost weight. They were never as strong as they appeared. They just controlled the narrative long enough to convince others they were untouchable. But fear-based empires always rot from within. When people unite under fear, their downfall is inevitable. They begin watching each other more than their enemies. They start hiding evidence from their own allies. That's when betrayal becomes routine and collapse becomes natural. You didn't destroy them, their fear did. It turned them against each other long before the truth arrived. Their strength was only ever a shadow pretending to be substance. Once the light hit, it disappeared instantly. That's the thing about false power. It always confuses intimidation for influence until it's forced to face someone who doesn't flinch. Number 3, kindness became their playground until consequence became their sentence. They used your goodness like a tool, bending it, testing it, exploiting it, believing it had no limits. They mistook your grace for gullibility, thinking that because you forgave easily, you would never retaliate. They confused mercy with blindness. What they never realized was that kindness has boundaries, and when crossed, it transforms into justice. Every time they took advantage of your silence, they were building their own evidence pile. Every time they laughed at your patience, they were recording their own confession without knowing it. They thought they were clever, playing a game of manipulation. But kindness is not weakness. It's clarity. It sees everything. It just chooses not to react too soon. You gave them space to do right, to grow, to change. They mistook that space for permission. But kindness is not a bottomless well. It has a limit that, once reached, shifts the energy completely. And when that moment came, it wasn't rage that met them. It was truth. The kind of truth that doesn't shout, doesn't argue, but corrects everything with precision. You didn't expose them out of revenge. You simply stopped protecting them from the outcomes they created. The moment you withdrew your grace, reality moved in to finish the work. That's when they started realizing what your kindness had been doing all along, shielding them from the full impact of their own actions. You were the calm in their chaos, the reason their schemes didn't collapse sooner. They thought they were outsmarting you, but they were only surviving under your restraint. Now the same hands that mocked your compassion are reaching for mercy they once disrespected. Consequences are simply kindness with its gloves off, the natural correction of imbalance. They thought your softness made you small. They never understood it made you untouchable. Because real power doesn't need to destroy. It simply allows the dishonest to destroy themselves. Number 4, they didn't flee from you. They fled from what you awakened in them. You didn't threaten their power. You threatened their illusion. Your presence stirred the parts of them they had buried, the guilt, the shame, the truth they had managed to hide from themselves for years. You didn't expose them with accusations. You exposed them by existing. You stood there as proof that their masks were fragile, that their confidence was rehearsed, that their control depended on the silence of others. They could deceive the world, but not the reflection you placed before them. Every time they looked at you, they were reminded of the parts of themselves they swore didn't exist anymore. Your energy, your clarity, your peace, all of it confronted the chaos they carried. You were the mirror they never asked for, the reminder of what authenticity feels like. And that's why they couldn't stay. People who build their lives on pretense cannot survive long in the presence of truth. You didn't attack them. You simply refused to lower your frequency to fit theirs. They called you intimidating, difficult, or even dangerous. But that was projection. What scared them wasn't your strength. It was their reflection in your calm. You represented what they lost: integrity, self-respect, and spiritual alignment. That's what made them run. It's easier to label someone as the problem than to admit that your own soul trembles in their presence. You didn't cast any spell or start any war. You just stood in your truth long enough for the false to panic. They weren't running from you. They were running from the realization that everything they built was hollow. You became the proof that exposure doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from standing still while others unravel. Their fear of you was really fear of themselves. And once that truth woke up, there was nowhere left to hide. Number 5. The city isn't bleeding by accident. It's purging. What looks like collapse is actually cleansing. The systems that once stood untouchable are finally being stripped of their disguises. The corruption, the lies, the silent deals done behind closed doors, all of it is surfacing. Every crack in the walls, every scandal in the news, every downfall of the untouchable isn't random. It's detox. The blood isn't the end. It's the rot being drained. What you're witnessing isn't destruction, it's recovery. For too long, the city wore perfume over decay. Smiles covered exploitation. Respectable titles masked manipulation. People built their power on deceit and called it destiny. But truth, like the body, can only hold toxins for so long before it forces a purge. That's what this is. The city throwing up what it can no longer digest. It's ugly, loud, and uncomfortable, but it's necessary. What's rotting can't stay hidden forever. Eventually, it leaks into everything. The politics, the faith, the culture, the people. And now it's all coming out. Every hidden motive, every forged signature, every stolen opportunity. It looks like chaos because exposure always does. But this isn't a fall from grace. It's grace itself, cleaning house. Those who benefited from the corruption are calling it crisis because truth feels like violence to those who lived on lies. The bleeding isn't punishment, it's purification. You weren't sent to destroy the city. You were sent to witness its rebirth. The noise, the fear, the confusion. They're labor pains, not death throes. A system that's been poisoned for years can't heal quietly. It has to scream. And right now, the city's scream is truth echoing through marble halls that once silenced it. Don't mistake the blood for loss. It's the proof that something new is finally being born. Something that can breathe clean again. Number 6. You didn't expose them, their own actions did. You just stopped protecting them from themselves. For years, your silence, your patience, and your grace acted like a shield, softening the blow of their own deceit. You covered for them in ways you didn't even realize, by being understanding, by giving second chances, by believing there was still good left in them. But when you finally stepped back, when you stopped cushioning their corruption, everything they built began to crumble under the weight of their own lies. The tower didn't fall because you pushed it. It fell because it was hollow. People like them depend on others to make them look stable. They survive off borrowed integrity, using good people as camouflage. As long as you stood close, your character made them appear honest. You were their moral cover. But once you removed your presence, their true nature was exposed. Not because you announced it, but because there was nothing left for them to hide behind. Truth doesn't need a speech. It just needs space. And when you gave it that space, it did what it always does. It revealed everything. They thought you were the one holding them back, not realizing you were the one holding them up. When you walked away, reality introduced itself. The same mouths that lied began contradicting themselves. The same hands that forged their path began undoing their own work. Their collapse wasn't karma arriving. It was consequence catching up. The beauty of truth is that it doesn't chase. It waits. You didn't destroy their image. You simply stopped editing it. And once truth no longer protected lies, the masks slipped, the alliances broke, and the facade came crashing down. You didn't expose them. They confessed through every desperate act of self-preservation. All you did was step aside and let truth do what it does best. Finish what deceit begins. Number 7. They mocked the light until it turned into a warrant. They laughed at truth like it was powerless, believing that what couldn't be seen couldn't touch them. They treated justice as superstition, something spiritual, abstract, or poetic, never realizing that the same force they mocked was taking notes. What began as whispers in the unseen slowly built a case in the physical. Every lie they told, every life they manipulated, every bribe they buried, all of it was recorded not by rumor, but by reality. Spiritual law doesn't forget, it just waits for the right courtroom. They called it bad luck when their secrets began surfacing. They called it a setup when doors started closing. But there was no curse and only consequence. The same light they ridiculed became evidence. The same truth they dismissed turned into paperwork, files, witnesses, and frozen accounts. What they once mocked as energy or karma became investigation and indictment. Cosmic justice doesn't stay invisible forever. It eventually finds a translator, and that translator is human law. They thought they could live outside accountability, building empires on intimidation and manipulation. But every system, no matter how corrupt, eventually becomes the stage for truth to perform. The irony is poetic. The ones who laughed at morality, now quoting laws to save themselves. The same mouths that dismissed conscience are now praying for leniency. The light they once mocked now shines from court documents, headlines, and testimonies that refuse to stay buried. This isn't revenge, it's correction. The universe always balances the scales, and sometimes it does it through people in suits and judges with pens. The spiritual and the physical are never separate. One simply mirrors the other. They thought the war was over when you walked away, not realizing that justice had only changed languages. The light they insulted didn't disappear. It got promoted to evidence. Number 8. The real curse was their greed, not your grace. They were never victims of your silence or your strength. They were victims of their own hunger for more. They wanted what wasn't theirs, and in reaching for it, they poisoned everything they touched. Their downfall didn't come from outside forces or spiritual backlash. It came from their inability to stop taking. Greed doesn't just consume, it empties. It promises fulfillment, but delivers exhaustion. They thought they were winning because they were gathering, but every gain they made only deepened the void inside them. They tried to possess what couldn't be owned: truth, favor, energy, people's loyalty. But power built on deception doesn't last. It eats itself from the inside. They mistook your grace for naivety, thinking your giving nature meant you didn't notice their taking. Yet what they didn't understand is that grace has its own kind of justice. It doesn't retaliate, it reveals. It lets people show their intentions until they collapse under the weight of their own choices. Their greed was their curse because it never had an end. No victory was enough. No praise was satisfying. No control felt complete. They kept grabbing at more until they strangled the very thing keeping them alive: credibility. Greed starved them spiritually while convincing them they were being fed. They traded peace for possession and mistook noise for success. Your grace didn't harm them. It simply didn't protect them from themselves. You stayed true, you gave generously, and you forgave easily. But even grace has boundaries. When they crossed those boundaries, their own desires became the weapon. What they hoarded began to rot. What they stole turned to evidence. The universe didn't need to punish them. It just let them keep feeding on the lie until the lie consumed them. They hexed themselves the moment they chose greed over gratitude. And that curse didn't come from you. It came from within them. Number 9, Their circle was never sacred. It was just a chain of survival. They called it brotherhood, family, covenant. But underneath all the polished words was fear. Each of them knew the other's secrets too well, so they stayed close not out of loyalty, but out of self-preservation. Their unity was never built on trust, only on the shared terror of exposure. Every vow they made was a contract of silence, every ritual a performance to maintain the illusion that they were one. But in truth, they were prisoners of their own alliances, bound together not by belief, but by blackmail. They didn't gather out of faith. They gathered because they couldn't afford to fall alone. Their connection was stitched with threats and stitched even tighter with lies. The moment one of them started to doubt, the rest closed ranks in panic, not to protect him, but to protect the secret. That's why betrayal always comes first in circles like that, because no one truly belongs. Each handshake hides suspicion, each smile masks calculation. Their rituals weren't sacred. They were rehearsed apologies waiting to be cashed in when the truth surfaced. When your presence entered their story, you didn't divide them. You revealed what was already divided. You exposed how fragile their unity really was. Fear-bound loyalty has an expiration date, and it always arrives when real truth walks into the room. They couldn't hold together under the weight of authenticity because they never had it to begin with. They depended on darkness to stay bonded. So when light appeared, they turned on each other faster than they ever turned toward you. Now their circle is unraveling, not because of external attack, but because the glue holding them together, shared guilt, has dried up. Once one cracks, the rest follow, because their loyalty was only as strong as their next secret. What they called sacred was just survival with a mask on, and survival without truth is never unity. It's a slow, inevitable collapse disguised as a covenant. Number 10, you were never the threat, you were the test. They thought you came to compete, to expose, to dismantle, but you didn't need to do any of that. You were sent to reveal. Your presence alone drew out their true character. The moment you entered their space, the masks began to slip, not because you attacked them, but because truth has a way of demanding alignment. You didn't challenge their positions. You challenged their intentions. They weren't being tested on power, they were being tested on purity. Every word you spoke, every act of patience you showed, became a mirror they couldn't avoid. They wanted to prove their dominance, but what they really proved was their dependency on deceit. Your calm unsettled them, because it highlighted how chaotic they were inside. They thought you were a rival when, in reality, you were the measurement of their authenticity. Your restraint forced their corruption to speak louder. Their reactions exposed them. The anger, the envy, the subtle attempts to sabotage, all signs of people who mistake exposure for persecution. You didn't need to retaliate or defend yourself. The way they treated you became their testimony. Each move they made in secret only revealed more of what they truly served: fear, greed, insecurity, ego. And that was the point. The universe didn't send you to destroy them, it sent you to uncover them. You were the divine audit, the quiet inspection they didn't see coming. Tests never announce themselves. They simply show up and observe who stays true. While you stayed grounded, they revealed their own fractures. While you waited, they rushed to expose their motives. You didn't bring their downfall. You brought their reflection. The test wasn't about you passing. It was about them proving who they really were when faced with someone they couldn't manipulate. And in that silence, truth marked its score, and they failed it all on their own. Number 11, the raids aren't revenge. They're resurrection. What's happening isn't payback, it's correction. Every file seized, every account frozen, every mask ripped off in public isn't the work of vengeance. It's the rebalancing of everything they tried to twist. For years, they operated under the illusion that power could rewrite truth. They silenced the honest, buried evidence and believed their influence could outsmart consequence. But divine order has a way of reclaiming its space, and when it does, it looks nothing like mercy to those who've lived off manipulation. This isn't chaos, it's clarity. What's being taken from them isn't random loss, it's restoration. Everything they built through deceit was never truly theirs, just borrowed time wrapped in arrogance. The raids are not attacks, they're receipts being collected. You can't defraud truth forever. Eventually it arrives at your doorstep, not in whispers or rumors, but in action. Every exposure, every audit, every headline isn't humiliation, it's harvest. The seeds they planted are simply growing into what they deserve. For too long the corrupt have mistaken grace for immunity. They thought silence meant safety, but silence was simply the universe giving them a chance to repent before the paperwork arrived. Divine order doesn't rush. It observes, aligns, then strikes with precision. That's what's happening now, not destruction, but divine renovation. This is resurrection because what's being restored is balance. The honest are being vindicated, the hidden truths are resurfacing, and the old system is coughing up everything it tried to swallow. It's poetic justice at work, clean, unstoppable, and deeply uncomfortable for those who thrived in the dark. The raids aren't here to destroy them. They're here to resurrect integrity. What's falling apart isn't being ruined, it's being rebuilt without the rot. And that's the beauty of divine order. It never seeks revenge. It simply restores what should have never been lost. Number 12. The same hands that signed corruption will now sign confessions. The irony is almost poetic. The very tools they used to build their deception are now turning against them. The signatures they once used to secure power, cover crimes, and manipulate systems are becoming undeniable proof of their guilt. Paper doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. It doesn't bend forever under pressure. And when truth finally comes knocking, those documents they thought were buried or erased begin to speak louder than any witness. Every forged deal, every secret transaction, every falsified approval becomes its own confession written in ink. They believed silence could erase evidence. They thought shredders, lies, and influence could rewrite history. But paper trails don't burn in silence. They haunt. Every signature is a timestamp of arrogance. Every approval a breadcrumb leading back to the architect. When they built their empires on fraud, they never imagined that the same paperwork they once waved in pride would one day testify against them. What they thought would protect them has now become prosecution material. That's how divine irony works. Justice doesn't always arrive in thunder or spectacle. Sometimes it comes as a file folder dropped on a desk, a signature compared under light, an audit too precise to argue. They wrote their downfall themselves, line by line, contract by contract, until their lies couldn't sustain the weight of the truth anymore. Now, those once confident hands tremble at the same documents they used to command. The very ink they trusted is now the evidence of betrayal, not betrayal of others, but of themselves. Every paper they once signed to climb higher was a step closer to exposure. The system they manipulated is now forcing them to read their own story aloud. And when it's time to confess, they won't be learning to write. They'll just be signing what they authored long ago. Number 13. They worshipped control until control turned on them. They believed power was something you could lock in a vault, dictate through fear, and bend to your will. They built systems designed to monitor, restrict, and dominate others, never realizing those same systems were silently learning their patterns. They left fingerprints on every rule they wrote, every law they twisted, every life they manipulated. And when the structure finally shifted, It didn't need rebellion. It simply used their own designs against them. The cages they built became their own confinement. Control is intoxicating until it demands consistency. They wanted to be above the system, not accountable to it. But power doesn't stay loyal. It obeys whoever wields it with alignment. The more they abused it, the more unstable it became, bending just long enough to serve them, then snapping back with the force of justice. Every surveillance they used, every policy they weaponized, every hierarchy they corrupted, began to collapse inward. Control doesn't like arrogance, it likes order. And when its creators break that balance, it resets, starting with them. They used fear to make others small, but fear eventually changes direction. The same intimidation they perfected became their daily anxiety. They couldn't trust anyone because they had taught everyone to betray. They couldn't relax because they built a world where rest meant weakness. And now they live inside the machinery they created, trapped in the loops of their own paranoia. It's poetic. They built systems that didn't just track others, but recorded themselves. Every command they issued, every manipulation they crafted is stored somewhere, waiting for the moment truth demands playback. They thought they owned control, but control was only borrowing them for a season. Now it's collecting its debt. The empire didn't fall because of rebellion. It fell because its architects forgot that control has a memory, and it never forgets who tried to play God. Number 14. You didn't win, you outlasted the lie. That's a different kind of victory, the kind that doesn't come with applause, but with silence that finally feels clean. You didn't need to argue, prove, or retaliate. You just had to keep standing when everything around you tried to convince you to fall. Lies have speed, but truth has endurance. The lie shouted, ran, manipulated, and performed while you simply waited. And in that waiting, everything false began to decay. You were never meant to fight on their level. Your strength wasn't in matching their noise. It was in holding your ground until their deception exhausted itself. Lies burn fast because they require constant feeding. Attention, fear, validation, and control. But truth doesn't need fuel. It just needs time. And that's what you gave it. By not engaging in their chaos, you gave truth the space to breathe, to rise, to unfold naturally without your interference. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. You didn't need to destroy them. They destroyed themselves, trying to maintain the illusion. Every false story eventually collapses under its own contradictions. Every mask slips when it's worn too long. You simply stood long enough for the collapse to happen. The world may call it patience, but in reality, it was endurance, the kind that only those who have been lied about, betrayed, or underestimated truly understand. When the dust settled, there was no need for revenge. Their downfall wasn't your doing. It was the truth, finally taking its rightful place. You didn't win through aggression, you won through alignment. You stayed consistent while they kept changing versions. You didn't rush to prove your worth. You let time prove it for you. That's the quiet, unshakable power of those who walk in truth. They don't need to conquer the lie. They just need to outlast it. In the end, everything that once looked like destruction was really revelation. The city's bleeding was never tragedy. It was transformation. The fall of the Coven, the exposure of corruption, the unraveling of false power, none of it was chaos. It was correction. What once operated in darkness has now been dragged into the light, not by force, but by the natural pull of truth, reclaiming what belongs to it. The lies collapsed under their own weight, the greedy choked on their own hunger, and the architects of manipulation became victims of their own design. You didn't have to fight fire with fire. You simply let time do what time does best, separate the real from the illusion. Every silence that was mocked became a weapon. Every act of kindness they exploited became evidence. Every restraint you showed became judgment against their deceit. You didn't expose them. They exposed themselves. You didn't destroy them. They decayed. You were never the threat. You were the mirror that revealed who they truly were. Now, divine order has returned to its rightful place. The very systems built to control others are now testifying against their creators. The same signatures that once hid corruption are writing confessions. The same voices that laughed at the light are now begging for mercy beneath it. And through it all, you stand, not victorious in noise, but in truth. Because real power isn't about domination, it's about endurance. You didn't win by fighting, you won by outlasting. This isn't the end of your story. It's the resurrection of everything pure, real, and unshakable. The world is finally seeing what patience looks like when it meets justice. And it looks like you. If this message spoke to your spirit, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because the truth doesn't whisper here, it awakens. Stay awakened, chosen ones.